What's going on, everyone? My name is Phil Gibson. Welcome back to the channel. And today we talk about why I purchased the Panasonic LUMIX GH5 in 2021. Let's get into it. I know, I already know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why would you buy a camera that is 4 years old? Why would you buy the GH5 whenever the autofocus is absolutely terrible? Well, in this video, I'm going to explain to you why I bought this camera and why I think it's a good option for filmmakers today. Let's get into it. Reason number one, price. This camera costs $1,300 brand new, and that is an absolute steal. This camera can do things that cameras these days that are still being made now cannot do. And that is crazy to me. You can find this camera used, Facebook Marketplace, eBay, sometimes Craigslist. You can find this camera for anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200. And this camera, that cheap, is amazing. The bundle that I bought was $1,300 on Amazon, and it came with 2 extra batteries, a charger for those batteries, and a really fast Sony Tough 64GB SD card. And what I'm trying to tell you about this camera, price to feature value, is insane. And that brings me to my second reason why I bought this camera in 2021, and that is features. This camera can record in 4K 10-bit up to 30 frames per second internally. And this is one of the first cameras that could film 4K 60 internally. And that is impressive. 4 years ago, this camera could already record in 4K 60 at 8-bit 420 quality. And that is amazing. It can also record in super high frame rates at full HD, all the way up to 180 frames a second. That will give you super silky smooth slow motion. Now, me personally, I never go over 120 frames per second, but the fact that you can go up to 180, that's pretty amazing. There are 6 customizable buttons on this camera that you can change to whatever you like. The menus are so easy to navigate and find the things that you are trying to look for. Also, on the top of the camera, there are 3 custom channels that you can change to quick settings, so that way you can just move the dial to hop into whatever shoot mode you want to shoot in. It's a really easy to use camera, and I think that's great. There's also a mode on this camera that's called 4K live cropping, and what that allows you to do is it allows you to get shots that look like you're using a slider or doing a push in or pull out effect. That's really crazy. You can do that in camera, and that's something that I think that people that do product photography or product shots for video or any kind of like product looking B-roll could really benefit from. This thing also has built-in image stabilization that makes this thing look almost like you're using a gimbal. It also has this thing called IS lock that almost makes it look like you're shooting on a tripod. It is insane what this camera can do at such a low cost. And it's amazing to think that this camera was doing things that like the Sony a7S III and the Canon R5 were doing way back in 2017. That is crazy. Okay, and this brings me to the third reason why I bought this camera in 2021. Lens options and how universal the Micro Four Thirds system really is. When it comes to lenses, for this camera, the native lenses are so much cheaper than Sony native lenses and Canon native lenses and other camera systems in general. Also, because of them being Micro Four Thirds, they're normally so much smaller than other native lenses for other camera companies, which makes them lighter, makes it where you can fit more stuff in your bag, and you never really feel like you're becoming like over encumbered. And that's a really positive thing when you're an on-the-go shooter. Also, how adaptive the Micro Four Thirds system really is. One that I've personally picked up is this Viltrox speed booster that allows me to connect EF mount lenses to my GH5, like this Sigma 18 to 35mm. Great lens, perfect for the camera, great combination. And now on to number 4, why I bought this camera in 2021. I think that this is the perfect camera for entry-level cinematographers. People wanting to get into cinematography, this is the perfect camera. It comes jam-packed full of all kinds of cinema features that you would not find on a basic mirrorless camera. It comes with a histogram, zebras, everything you need to make sure that you are properly exposed for your project. And yes, most of the stuff that you shoot in this, you're gonna have to shoot in manual focus, but they have a manual focus lock on this camera to make sure that you stay in focus. I'm telling you, this camera for the money is jam-packed with so much stuff that you would need for filmmaking that it is ridiculous. Like I said before, the price to feature ratio is insane. And now on to the fifth thing that really excites me about this camera, and that is the build quality. The moment that you pick this camera up, you're going to immediately think that this thing is built super solid. This thing feels good in the hand. The grip is perfect. It feels big, but not too big. It feels super, super quality. It is water resistant, dust resistant. You know, you can shoot with this thing in the rain and in the snow. You can shoot in this thing in dry weather, not really have to worry about it that much. And that is a wonderful thing. This camera takes a full HDMI. That is crazy. 2017 camera takes a full HDMI. Also, it has a fully articulating screen. I know people love that. Another thing, a huge feature for this articulating screen is whenever you plug in a mic, the screen doesn't block the mic port. So you can still articulate the screen without disturbing the microphone that's on your camera. It also takes 2 SD cards to make sure that you can back up what you're recording and you never have to worry about one card going out and losing your footage. The sixth thing that I really enjoy about this camera is the app that you can use on your smart device for the camera. It's perfect. Absolutely perfect. It allows you to check your focus, set your exposure, everything that you can do on the camera, you can do in the app. And like I said, it is the perfect companion for this camera. Now, with all the good, there's always some bad, and I'm going to get into the little bit of things about this camera that I do not enjoy. Now, the number one thing that I do not like about this camera is the autofocus, and I'm pretty sure that is the main thing that people don't like about this camera. This camera will force you to get better at manual focusing your shots. This camera is going to make you a better filmmaker because it's going to force you to use manual focus. Now, if you're a YouTuber and you do most of your work on a tripod, you're not going to have any trouble at all with this camera. You just set your focus, make sure that your exposure is correct, sit down and do your video, and everything is going to be fine. But for people that do lots of run and gun, try to capture things in the moment, you're gonna have to be prepared and ready to manual focus your shots. Now, the second thing that I dislike about this camera is also something that I do like about it, the Micro Four Thirds. Micro Four Thirds system, like I said, is very adaptable, and there's lots of cheap options for lenses for this camera. But where Micro Four Thirds fails slightly over ASPC cameras and definitely full frame cameras is that the sensor is so small that it has a hard time letting in a lot of light. Micro Four Thirds cameras are not good in low light situations. So you have to have lots of light to make sure that your shots get exposed properly. I know that's something that a lot of people don't like about the Micro Four Thirds system, but at the same time, if done correctly, it's an amazing system to get into. Also, Micro Four Thirds doesn't allow you to get as shallow of a depth of field. Like, you see how blurry the background is right now? Like, with me this close to the lens. This camera, it's harder to get that. And it's because of the sensor. Also, with this camera, any lens that you put on this camera that is native to the Micro Four Thirds system is going to have a 2x crop factor. 2 times. So if you put a 18mm lens on this camera, it's going to be a 36mm lens. If you put a 12mm lens on this camera, it's going to be a 24mm. And if you put a 35mm lens on this camera, it's going to be a 70mm. That's something that you really need to take into consideration, especially if you do a whole lot of like wide angle talking heads type stuff, because this camera is going to be a little bit harder to get that. But with this camera and a speed booster using a EF mount lens, this camera goes from being a 2x crop to more like a 1.5, closer to a ASPC crop sensor camera. And with that, it allows more light to come into the sensor, which allows you to film a little bit better in low light situations because it allows more light to come into your sensor. See, the Viltrox Speed Booster has a little piece of glass in the center of it, which allows the sensor to be magnified and allows more light to come in to the sensor to allow you to shoot better in low light situations. And really the only other negative that I can think of that you can maybe consider a negative, not really for me, but maybe for other people, is that if you choose to shoot in some of these higher codecs on this camera, you really have to have a strong computer to edit the footage, because this camera does make really high quality images and video, and it can be pretty hard on your editing system. Well, with all that being said, I've been using this Canon M6 Mark II for a really long time on this channel and on the What Blows My Turbo channel. And I knew that it was time that I moved up a little bit to a higher quality camera. You know, I thought about buying the Sony a7S III, and I thought about buying the Panasonic LUMIX S5, and I really love those cameras, but I really decided that this camera was the camera for me because it allows me to move myself up a little bit more into a professional camera and get myself prepared for something like a a7S III or a S5. I do plan on moving to a full frame camera at some point in the very near future, but I do think that I'm going to hold on to this Panasonic LUMIX GH5 because this camera, like I said, is amazing, and I'm already adapting to it very well. And I think this will be a very useful tool in my filmmaking career. You know, I've been looking up to a bunch of creators right now that use Panasonic or Micro Four Thirds cameras, and I've reached out to a few of them people, and they've really helped me understand more about this system, about this camera, and I can't wait to create some stuff with this camera. With everything that I've said, I hope that if you're looking into maybe buying this camera, I'm giving you some light onto why this camera could be a good option in 2021 still, even though it is 4 years old. I just think that this camera is still doing a lot of the same things that these higher end cameras like the Sony a7S III and the Panasonic LUMIX S5 and the Canon R5 are doing now. I just think that Panasonic LUMIX have been ahead of the game for a while when it comes to recording features and stuff in a camera. Now, I do think that the autofocus definitely needs work, but like I said, this camera will help you get better at manual focusing, and I think that's important if you're going to be a filmmaker. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I really would appreciate it if you would hit that thumbs up button. And as of always, take it easy.